So Joel Klatt has a podcast, and I actually like it as far as a college football podcast goes. He said something that's interesting that made me think, and I've been thinking about it a lot. He said this a couple months ago about Stetson Bennett and about how he's not going to be hard to replace at Georgia. I'm going to read the quote. I've got it written down for you in a second, but made a pretty big statement about Stetson Bennett and about kind of what the machine is at Georgia. But one college football expert does not think that Georgia's going to have a hard time replacing Stetson Bennett, a guy who did a lot for Georgia, a guy who was a Heisman finalist, a guy who was the MVP of the offensive MVP of 4 college football playoff games, a guy that was the starting quarterback for 2 national championship teams, a guy who really just embodied Georgia and did a lot for Georgia. Brought a lot of attention to the program, really did a lot for the University of Georgia football program, never gave up. Is Stetson Bennett an absolute superstar? Is he as talented as someone like Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow? No, but he did win national championships. He did play well, and he was a leader that I do think will be difficult to replace in some ways, and so I don't totally agree with what Joel Klatt had to say. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post giving you what I have to say about Stetson Bennett right after I read this for you. You know how I feel about Stetson Bennett. He played great, and he had great statistics. He gets to New York, and, good for him. But this is not a guy that's going to be overly difficult to replace. I think that they will be able to replace him and that they're going to continue to be a dominant force in college football. So his comment is that Georgia's a machine that he'll be able to replace. And look, I don't completely disagree with what he has to say. Part of that is because I think Carson Beck or the other capable backups for Georgia are going to be good quarterbacks. Georgia's got a good system. Georgia's got great players around, right? So Joel Klatt's not just making some crazy statement, right? Because I'm not the only person that thinks Georgia's going to be really good. Georgia has a chance to win a national championship again, and that Carson Beck, if he is the starter, like we all presume, is going to have a really good year, right? So what he's saying is not crazy, but here's where he's wrong. That there's what Stetson did for Georgia matters a lot, and it's hard to replace the heart. It's hard to replace, I think, the love for Georgia. It's hard to replace the brand that he really was, the brand that he became, right? And it's hard to replace the 10 touchdowns he ran for on the ground, and the threat that he was as a scrambler, right? Those are not easy things to replace necessarily. Carson Beck is not that, right? I think Carson Beck has a more talented arm than Stetson, but I think Stetson didn't get enough credit for how talented his arm was. Maybe didn't have an absolute cannon. I do think Carson can make more throws probably and has a more talented arm, but is he the runner that Stetson was? No. And I hate to say this too. Will he ever mean to Georgia what Stetson meant to Georgia? No, either, because Stetson is on Georgia's Mount Rushmore. If we're being real, I think our recruiting guy, Matt DeBerry, Matt, I believe he wrote an article about Georgia's Mount Rushmore. He put Stetson in there, and I completely agree with that sentiment, right? So replacing that is hard. From a football standpoint, is it difficult? No, and I think it's because Georgia is so good. It's something we talk about a lot on this channel. Georgia is a machine, and look, after it's Carson Beck or Gunnar Stockton or Brock Vandagriff, if those guys are next up in line, they've got 2 more guys coming, and that's Dylan Raiola and Ryan Puglisi, and there will be more to come after that. And Georgia's at a point in time in this program and in recruiting where they are getting absolute studs at every position across the board. Look at this past month for Georgia, just absolutely dominating on the recruiting trail, getting all these 3, 4, and 5-star players, and getting them 1 overall player, and having him be a recruiting pitch to others. So Georgia is in a prime position to where, it is not as difficult to replace a quarterback, right? Because you plug it into a system that's winning national championships, and it's a military base. It's a machine. That's the way I like to compare it. That's what I like to compare Georgia's football program to. Kirby Smart's the general, the CEO, the leader, whatever you want to call it. They run and operate on a schedule of detail. And look, other programs do the exact same thing, right? And are detailed and are run really well. But there is something about the way Georgia runs this program, and it's really about who's in charge of the program and the way that he wants it. And you've seen all the crazy videos of Kirby Smart screaming. That's just who he is, right? It's not made up. When you're close to it, you're getting the same thing, right? That's what he is. Kirby Smart is Georgia's general, and he's why they win these wars, and they've won the last two. Are they going to win again? Carson Beck, is he good enough to do that? I think he has the capability. I think that's in his wheelhouse. It's easy for me to say that when I'm as close to the program as I am, when I cover the program like this, right? It's harder for other people to say that. And so is Bennett going to be hard to replace? Yeah, he's going to be a little hard to replace, right? He's not, it's not like, look, he won 2 national championships. He started in 2 national championships. He was part of many clutch moments for Georgia and many huge moments for Georgia. Replacing that is not easy, even if you have a 4-star quarterback who's been in the program for 3 years, who I think is going to have an incredible season. I think Carson Beck's going to do very good for Georgia, and I think they're going to win a lot of football games this year. But saying Stetson Bennett is not very difficult to replace. Look, I get where it's coming from. Don't agree with it. What do you think? Links are down below for Dawg Struction Double Dogs. Man, I don't even know if I said anything about it. Double Dogs and Dawg Struction. The magazine's free if you get Double Dogs right now. Link to our Shopify is below. Thanks for watching again.